Hello from Praxis Recruitment. I'm Christina Stewart. Today, I want to talk to employers about ways to incorporate, to attract, and to recruit Indigenous people into your workforce. This is a question I've actually been asked twice in the last week. So I thought, let's make a video and address this. So now, first of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm not an expert. I am not Indigenous. Certainly, I'm an expert in recruitment, and I'm an expert in recruiting in remote and rural locations around the province, which means that we do work with Indigenous communities in Indigenous communities, and we work with employers to make sure that their workforce represents the community in which they're working. So I certainly come from that lens, but I want to make sure that I'm being very clear that there are Indigenous folks out there who are doing great work that could be supporting this process as well. So now, the second thing that I want to say is that I so appreciate this question. I appreciate this question because it means that employers, you are on a quest to diversify. And I think that this is such an opportunity. There are about 300,000 First Nation individuals within the province of BC. So that is, Indigenous. So that's First Nation, that's Inuit, and that's Métis. So Indigenous people within the province. So what you want to make sure is that your workforce is actually reflective of the community in which you're working. And for many of us in the province of BC and elsewhere in North America, but definitely in BC, that means incorporating and ensuring that your workforce employs Indigenous folks. And so I think, now don't quote me on this, I think there's 166 different First Nations throughout the province of BC, and every single one of them is unique. But in those 166 different First Nations, that is a massive labor pool. And so we want to make sure it just makes sense that we're looking to First Nation communities, to Indigenous people, to ensure that our workforce is fully functioning and diversified, right? And reflective of the community in which you're working. So going back to those 166 different First Nations, you need to look at them, and you need to look at you in order to expand and ensure that you are attracting Indigenous people into your work environment. And so one thing that the place where we need to start as non-Indigenous people who are looking to hire is we need to take a step back and remember that there are massive barriers for Indigenous people entering into our jobs, entering into workforces that aren't necessarily Indigenous, And we need to remember that those barriers come from this place of this history of trauma. And we need to remember that there has been, and there still is, a stigma attached to what an Indigenous employee might look like. And so looking through the lens of that Indigenous person, they aren't necessarily going to be putting their hand up and saying, yeah, hire me. They are potentially not going to trust you, right? They are wondering if you think that stigma exists, that there's stereotypes there that you believe, what your biases are. Is there racism? Because this is the lens through which they have applied in the past, perhaps, and been stereotyped or have experienced racism. And so we need to remember as non-Indigenous leaders that the lens through which Indigenous people are looking at our workforce is very different from the way that maybe we think of it. And so that brings me to the second point, is that we need to make sure that we're looking at our own processes. So yeah, we need to be looking at them, but we also definitely need to be looking at our own systems, our own processes, and dismantle them if there is any hint of racism or any edges that an Indigenous applicant might trip over. And so I want to actually share a story of mine. So we do work with, as I mentioned, some First Nation organizations, as well as we work in remote and rural communities around the province. And so last year, there was work that was available in a very small community that was predominantly, I want to say not 100%, but predominantly it was First Nation community. And so what we did was we actually went there. So we held a little job fair. We went and we set up a little table in the community room at the public health office in this First Nation community area. And we made sure that the band office knew that we were coming, of course, and they let everyone know. And we asked people to just come and meet us. And so throughout that day, we worked, met with all kinds of people who were really interested in potentially taking on some of this work that was to come. And so when we asked them to give us their information, right? Normally we would be asking for a resume, but in this case, we simply just asked for, kind of name and contact information. And so we could remember them and then reach out again when everything got going. And I think I know the vast majority wrote down their name and they wrote down the band office phone number, because they first of all, didn't have a resume. And it's not because they were, lazy or uninterested. Let's be really, really clear on that. It's simply that there was no need before. There's no work there before. And so this meant that we had to go there. We had to meet them. We had to come directly to them in order for them to trust that this existed, and also in order for them to be able to connect with us and share that information, just their name and phone number. And then second, the phone number was the band office, because these individuals didn't even have phones. So when we're looking to our own processes, and if I'm looking to fill those roles and I just throw an ad on Indeed and then hope that people apply, I am limiting and cutting out that entire demographic of people. My light just went out. Anyhow, so that I want to make sure that now obviously that's an extreme example, but I want you to be thinking at it through that lens, right? Through that lens of what limiting barriers am I putting in place that are also going to compound the barriers that these Indigenous people are already facing as far as trust goes. Now my light's back on again, right? So think about your ads. Think about the way that you word your ads. Are you asking for resumes for entry-level roles that maybe don't require them? So that's a really good place to start. The second area that I really want to focus on today is in talking about going to the First Nation. So now I live and I work and I play on the traditional unceded territory of the Sechelt Nation. If I cross the street, I'm in the homeland of the Squamish people. And so if I'm looking to hire and I want to hire Indigenous folks, I'm going to go straight to the Sechelt Nation and straight to the Squamish Nation. Generally, First Nation organizations, the company, right, the business attached to them, have a training and development and employment officer who, that's their job, is to ensure that their members, their community members, are employed. And so that means sometimes ensuring that they get the training that they need, and then also trying to connect them with employers that are local. So if you don't know who your training or development or employment or whatever they want to call them, officer is in the First Nation that's local to you, that is the first place that you should start, for a couple reasons. Number one, they may know somebody. If you're looking for an entry-level accountant or a senior accountant, or if you're looking for a marketing person or whatever, heavy-duty equipment operator, you name it, that training and development officer that works for that First Nation is going to know who in their membership has the skills and education and ability and interest in taking that job on. So they're an excellent resource to connect you directly with people, directly with applicants. The second piece is that person can help you to post the job. Often there are newsletters that are circulated throughout the community membership. You could very easily ask and get your job posting into the newsletter or post it on an actual job board at the First Nation, right? So there's a great way there to make sure that you're hitting all of the First Nations directly. So take a look at what your ads look like before you do that, and make sure that they're inclusive and that there isn't any language in there that somebody might trip over that has an edge or is racist, point blank, right? And then take it directly to the community, okay? So I want you to remember, that there is a lack of trust, that there's barriers that exist that have been in place for a very long time, embedded in the history of the Indigenous people and their perspective of how they've been treated, and there's a bit of a trust issue at times. So I really want you to remember that. So hopefully this has been helpful. I want you to remember also that National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, September 30th. Make sure you've got your orange shirt. Make sure that you've got something planned in your workforce. I know that some businesses are planning on closing, and don't feel that you have to do that. That can be very expensive, but I want to make sure that you're doing something. You know, you want to make sure that you're taking action, that you're acknowledging what the day is. It's not a holiday, it's a day for truth and reconciliation. And so all of us have the power to take action toward what that reconciliation is. So keep the awesome questions coming. I hope today has been incredibly helpful. Please let me know if you've got any follow-up or any other questions around this really, really important topic. Thanks for asking, and I'll see you next time.